Last night, as we said, a big night for the Democrats. But not only did Phil Murphy win in New Jersey and Ralph Northam winning in Virginia, those may be the headlines from last night. But if you read the fine print, there are a lot of other storylines that aren't getting as much attention, but might be just as telling. In Washington state, Democrats took control of the state Senate for the first time in 5 years. They also control the governor's mansion and state house. Now, there's effectively a blue wall in the Northwest with California, Oregon, and Washington. And in Virginia, Danica Roem just became the first openly transgender person elected to a state legislature. And to me, just as telling, she beat a Republican institution there who'd been there for more than 20 years named Bob Marshall. He's the same guy who sponsored a bathroom bill that would restrict which transgender people couldn't use. And then he also actually proudly referred to himself as the state's chief homophobe. She beat him. Now, for more on all of this and where we're possibly heading with the midterms next year, let's bring in ABC News political director Rick Klein. And Rick, you have that. You have Maine voting to expand Medicaid last night. To me, the takeaway was anybody who looks at just two governors' races is really missing the message last night. I don't know if it was a wave, but it was something much bigger than two races.
I 100% agree. To me, it was a mini wave at the very least, maybe a lot more than that, depending on what happens next year, and a win in the constant battles of the culture war, because you had a repudiation of Trump and Trumpism of many of the issues that he goes and represents. I think it's telling that most of the majority of Virginia voters, if you had to choose an issue they voted on, it was health care, and those voters were much more likely to support the Democrat. You mentioned that Medicaid expansion. You mentioned the transgendered individual. This has been something that happened, frankly, coast to coast, and I think it begins to speak to a trend that, at least for the night, Democrats came out in very large numbers to support the candidates and the issues that stood in opposition to President Trump.
You know, we did some exit polls. We've also did some polls in our own region in the metropolitan area, and what surprised me was some of the personal issues, especially in some of the nasty campaigns, almost didn't matter. I don't know if that's part of the fact that what we saw last November and almost all rules go out the window in this, but there was some identity politics, and certainly there was some issue politics. You mentioned health care and even a very unpopular tax plan, particularly in our region. But there also seems to be something more, and it's hard to quantify it, but I just get the sense, Rick, that people are tired of getting up every day and figuring out what the next fight's going to be, whether it's culture wars or whatever else. They're just tired. It's been a very long year. I don't know how you quantify that, but do you get that sense as well?
Well, I would say we're going on 12, 14 years now of pretty consistent wave elections, and that's people voicing their frustration at whoever happens to be in power at the moment. That's washed out Democratic and Republican majorities alike, and I feel like that is something that we know is a known quantity. So I think for any Democrats who are saying, look, this is a huge endorsement of our vision for the country, they have to remember the feeling that they had a year ago right now, when Hillary Clinton was expected to win and ended up in the upset of the century as national politics. So voters are fickle, and who shows up can be very fickle indeed. And I think anyone who views anything out of an individual election as a mandate is going to find out that your hold on power is going to be temporary.
Clearly, Ed Gillespie didn't think that Donald Trump campaigning with him in Virginia would help his chances. Obviously, the tweet from President Trump says he made a mistake here, not embracing him, modest that he is. That said, though, I'm showing my viewers now a map just in our region, and there's a bunch of Republicans up next year in the House that could have a real challenge. And I'm just going to pick John Faso in the 19th District as a perfect example. He was strong-armed by the White House to go along here with this health care bill. He voted for it even though he had reservations. President turns around and then says it was a mean bill. Now there's a tax bill out here that would actually raise taxes for New Yorkers in his district. My point is, a lot of folks, not just him, have tried to be somewhat half pregnant on this, where they're with the president, not to offend the base, but against him on selective issues. Can they still do that? Are there calculations going on right now in Republican circles for some to say, listen, I'm not going to do a little beyond and retire. I still want to have a job, but I might as well run away from the president and be more vocal about it? Or is that political suicide for a Republican?
I think one message is that you can't be halfway in when it comes to President Trump. Ed Gillespie tried that, and he got defeated resoundingly. I think you're likely to see more Republicans cast their lots entirely with Trump and Trumpism and decide to do that. But I think in some people, including some of the folks in blue states that you reference, it's going to be tough to do that. And you may see them declaring independence, voting against the tax bill, saying, I'm going to stand up for my constituents, and even that's against the White House. I feel like it's going to have to be a declaration of independence for more Republicans. Many of them just feel like it's a no-win situation. You can either embrace the president and face some kind of a backlash there, or try to run away from him and not really escape what right now looks like a stench that surrounds him, particularly in blue states.
It will be a crazy next 12 months. Rick, I appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So what I tried with Rick, and see if you buy this or not, is we're going to see this when we go to our Thanksgiving dinners. Yeah, whether,
forward to it.
Yeah, exactly. But yes, people, as I said, there's identity politics and there's issue politics. I really believe people didn't like where their health care potentially was going in the movements. People look at their tax, especially in our region, that could go up under these plans, and that was a turn. But I think there's a lot of other people who said, well, they wanted to change Washington. They're tired of the fighting. There's a fatigue in this country. I have the fatigue. We do this every night, Andrew.
Yes.
It's just, we don't know from every day whether it's a tweet, whether it's a personal fight, whether it's an inflammatory comment, whether it's, forget about condemning, but almost abetting horrible behavior, investigations, whatever the case may be. 3 more years of this, another year.
Except I'm looking for proof of that thesis from what we saw last night.
I can't offer it yet.
And I don't have it because Northam in Virginia, Curran in Nassau County, Latimer in Westchester County.
I'll give you my proof, and it's very anecdotal at best. In all those races, if you believe the polls, and I put merit in them, all the undecideds made up the margin that we didn't expect. It seems that if you're in the middle and you can go either way, you're going to give the benefit of the doubt to the party that isn't Trump because maybe of what I said.
I think, I'm not sure if they were rejecting Trump's negativity and the Republican negativity from those candidates, or if they were accepting the negative attacks coming from the Democrats in those cases, which fueled into their anger against Trump. I still think it's a very angry electorate. And I think you saw people responding to both their anger and the anger that was reflected in the races.
We showed a few others, like the District 12 in Virginia, right? Where a guy had been there for 24 years who called himself king of the homophobes, okay? Mm-hmm. Obviously, that was acceptable to his district for a long time. Lost a person who is transgender 4 years into their transition. And he made that person's sexuality an issue during the campaign. Right. He lost. Yeah. Look at what happened, I said, with Medicaid in Maine and the rest. They're expanding it now, even though Governor LePage is right of Attila Hun. Right. My point is, I think people have had it in certain degrees with the ugliness part of it. Some people. A plurality of people.
I don't know if I agree with that, only because the ugliness continues to be effective. And keep in mind that these are all in areas that were inclined to be generous to Democrats anyway, given the setup that we had last night and the ramp up into the election.
How about Rockland County, Andrew? I mean, places like that, which are always Republican, and they still voted. Mm-hmm. I mean, he reelected. But the margins even, not just who won, but the margins in places where they even lost.
But you'll have a more energized Republican base next year when the control of Congress is up. And don't forget, everybody who's running on the Republican line for Congress next year is going to say, you elect a Democratic majority, the first thing they're going to do is impeach President Trump and bring this country into a constitutional crisis.
Maybe the public wants that.
Maybe they do.
But
I would be careful about taking too many lessons out of the races we got last night and applying them across the board to the entire nation. Well, it works in leaning blue and blue areas and purple areas. I don't know if that strategy works in red.
And also what we don't know is it enough for the Democrats just to say we hate Trump? Do they have to offer up an alternative? Whether they will or not, who knows? And whether they have to or not, also an open-ended question.
I'll say yes to that, they do have to.
Andrew, thank you. All right, coming up next, this woman just got as little as 18 months in prison, even though she admitted to the cops that she pulled the plug on her fiance's kayak, causing him to drown in the icy Hudson, and not a whole lot of contrition in the aftermath. Seems a pretty light sentence to me. We'll discuss and debate with our panel of attorneys.